32 carrier-based F-35Cs intercept a Chinese amphibious invasion fleet carrying 12,000 troops toward Taiwan. In a 90-minute battle, they sink 67 of 80 ships, preventing the invasion and changing the course of the war. August 8, 2025, Taiwan Strait, 45 nautical miles west of Taiwan's coast. At 2:17 a.m., U.S. surveillance satellites detected massive movement from multiple Chinese ports. Within minutes, the assessment was unambiguous. China was launching an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. 80 ships, the largest invasion fleet assembled since World War II, were heading east across the Taiwan Strait. The armada consisted of 12 Type 071 amphibious transport docks, 20 Type 072 landing ships, 38 civilian ferries and cargo vessels requisitioned for military use, and 10 escort warships, including destroyers and frigates. Intelligence estimates suggested the fleet carried over 12,000 People's Liberation Army troops, 400 armored vehicles, artillery systems, and supplies for a sustained invasion. The crossing, conducted at night to minimize detection time, was timed to reach Taiwanese beaches at dawn, when amphibious assaults traditionally had the highest success rates. Chinese planners had calculated that by the time American forces could respond, the invasion fleet would either be ashore or close enough that attacking it would risk catastrophic civilian casualties among the thousands of conscripted merchant mariners. But the calculation contained a fatal flaw. USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group was operating 120 nautical miles east of Taiwan, specifically positioned to respond to exactly this scenario. At 2:25 a.m., the carrier's air wing commander received authorization from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Chinese invasion fleet detected, rules of engagement, destroy all military vessels and troop transports, minimize civilian casualties where possible. Mission priority: prevent the invasion from reaching Taiwan. At 2:30 a.m., USS Ronald Reagan began launching aircraft at maximum tempo. Within 20 minutes, 32 F-35C Lightning II fighters were airborne. Each aircraft carried 4 AGM-158C LRASM anti-ship missiles, the most advanced maritime strike weapon in the American arsenal. The LRASM, with its 450 nautical mile range, 1,000-pound warhead, and advanced AI-guided terminal attack profile, was specifically designed to sink large warships and troop transports. Total strike package: 128 LRASM missiles against 80 ships. The mathematics suggested near total destruction of the invasion fleet. At 2:52 a.m., the F-35Cs, flying in darkness at 25,000 feet, detected the Chinese fleet on radar at 180 nautical miles. The tactical picture was complex. The 80 ships were organized into 3 distinct groups, each protected by Chinese destroyers equipped with HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles. The destroyers, Type 052D guided missile vessels, were capable air defense platforms that could engage aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles. But they had never faced an opponent employing stealth fighters launching long-range anti-ship missiles from positions beyond their effective engagement range. At 3:05 a.m., the lead F-35C pilot, Commander Lisa Martinez, a 13-year naval aviator with combat experience over Syria, coordinated the attack plan across all 32 aircraft. The strategy was brutally efficient. Prioritize troop transports and amphibious ships first. They carried the invasion force and were the mission-critical targets. Second priority: escort warships that could defend the fleet. Final priority: civilian vessels requisitioned for military use to be engaged only if they continued toward Taiwan after warnings. The F-35Cs, using their sensor fusion to create a complete tactical picture, assigned specific targets to each aircraft to avoid wasting missiles. At 3:12 a.m., from a range of 140 nautical miles, the first wave of LRASMs launched. Should the F-35s engage civilian ships carrying troops, or only military vessels? Type A for attacking all vessels in the invasion fleet. Type B for limiting strikes to military ships only. Comment your reasoning. 16 F-35Cs fired 64 LRASM missiles toward the Chinese fleet. The missiles, flying at low altitude to avoid radar detection and using onboard AI to coordinate attacks, approached the fleet in a coordinated wave. At 3:32 a.m., the first LRASMs entered terminal attack phase. Chinese air defense systems detected the incoming missiles at 25 kilometers, insufficient time for effective response. The destroyer's HQ-9 missiles launched, but the LRASM's low-altitude approach and coordinated timing overwhelmed the defenses. At 3:33 a.m., the first LRASM struck a Type 0701 amphibious transport dock, the Kunlunshan. The missile's 1,000-pound warhead penetrated the ship's side and detonated in a troop compartment packed with 800 soldiers preparing for the landing. The explosion killed over 300 instantly and started fires that spread through the ship. Kunlunshan, unable to control the damage, began sinking. Troops, many injured and in shock, jumped into the water as the ship listed. At 3:34 a.m., 3 more Type U-701s were struck. 2 began sinking immediately. The third, the Changbishan, was hit by 2 LRASMs that destroyed its well deck and engine room, leaving it dead in the water. The Type 072 landing ships, smaller vessels carrying 250 troops each, were hit by single LRASMs that proved devastating to their less robust construction. At 3:35 a.m., 8 Type 072s were destroyed within 60 seconds. The ships, designed for beach assaults rather than open ocean combat, had minimal damage control capabilities. When the LRASM's warheads detonated, the vessels broke apart or capsized within minutes. Troops trapped below decks drowned as compartments flooded. Those who reached the deck faced the choice of staying aboard sinking ships or jumping into water where survival time, even with life jackets, was measured in hours. At 3:37 a.m., the Chinese escort destroyers began firing their own anti-ship missiles toward the suspected positions of American aircraft. 24 YJ-18 anti-ship missiles launched, flying toward where radar operators believed the F-35Cs were located. But the stealth fighters, having launched their weapons from standoff range, had already repositioned. The YJ-18s, lacking accurate targeting data, flew into empty ocean and eventually exhausted their fuel. Not a single F-35C was threatened. Subscribe to Navy Mission now for the most detailed carrier aviation warfare analysis available. This is coverage that reveals modern naval combat. At 3:40 a.m., the second wave of F-35Cs, having maneuvered to different launch positions, fired 64 more LRASMs. This wave targeted the civilian vessels requisitioned for military transport and the remaining military ships. The 38 civilian ferries and cargo ships, identified by intelligence as carrying troops and equipment, were engaged despite their non-military status. International law permits attacking civilian vessels used for military purposes, and these ships were integral to the invasion. At 3:58 a.m., the second wave struck. The civilian vessels, constructed to commercial standards without military armor or damage control systems, were catastrophically vulnerable. A single LRASM hitting a ferry's hull would penetrate and detonate inside, creating massive casualties among packed troops. At 3:59 a.m., 18 civilian vessels were hit by LRASMs. The casualties were horrific. Each ship carried between 200 and 400 troops. The explosions killed hundreds instantly and started fires that spread rapidly through ships loaded with fuel and ammunition. Survivors jumped overboard, but few had proper life-saving equipment. The water temperature, 26 degrees Celsius, allowed survival for hours, but without rescue, exposure and exhaustion would eventually kill those who survived the initial sinking. By 4:05 a.m., 45 minutes after the first LRASM launch, the Chinese invasion fleet was shattered. 42 ships were sinking or had already sunk. 17 more were severely damaged, on fire, or dead in the water. The remaining 21 ships, recognizing the fleet's destruction, turned back toward China at maximum speed. But the F-35Cs, having expended only two-thirds of their missile inventory, pursued. At 4:10 a.m., Commander Martinez transmitted to her formation, "Fleeing vessels are still part of the invasion force. Continue engagement until they reach Chinese territorial waters or surrender." The remaining 16 F-35Cs repositioned and prepared to launch their final LRASMs, but at 4:15 a.m., Chinese military command transmitted a message on emergency frequencies. "We are withdrawing. Ceasefire. Request permission to conduct search and rescue operations." Commander Martinez relayed the message to the Carrier Strike Group commander, who consulted with U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. The decision came at 4:20 a.m. Cease offensive operations. Monitor the situation. Allow Chinese rescue efforts, but maintain strike capability if they attempt to continue the invasion. At 4:25 a.m., Chinese ships that were still seaworthy began rescue operations, pulling survivors from the water. But the scale of the disaster overwhelmed their capabilities. Thousands of troops were in the water. Many were injured. Some clung to debris. Others wore life jackets but were exhausted. Chinese helicopters from coastal bases arrived at 5:00 a.m. to assist, but they could only rescue dozens at a time while thousands needed help. U.S. forces, monitoring the rescue efforts, did not interfere but also did not assist. The decision, controversial in hindsight, reflected the reality that American participation would complicate the situation without significantly improving outcomes. By dawn on August 8th, the full extent of the catastrophe was visible. 67 Chinese ships destroyed or sunk, 13 others damaged but returning to port, over 6,000 Chinese troops dead, drowned, or missing, an additional 3,000 wounded, many with severe burns or blast injuries. The invasion of Taiwan had been stopped before a single soldier reached the beach. China's most ambitious military operation had been annihilated in 90 minutes by 32 carrier-based fighters. Do you think attacking civilian ships carrying troops is justified in war, or does it constitute a war crime? Share your ethical assessment below. For Taiwan, the F-35C strike was salvation. Chinese forces that would have landed on beaches that morning never arrived. The invasion that would have killed thousands of Taiwanese civilians and soldiers was prevented. Taiwanese military forces, prepared for desperate defensive battles, instead watched as Chinese ships burned and sank in the strait. The gratitude toward American forces was profound and immediate. Taiwanese president, addressing the nation at 8 a.m., thanked the United States for defending Taiwan's freedom and democracy. For China, August 8th became the worst military disaster since the founding of the People's Republic. The loss of 6,000 troops in a single battle exceeded Chinese casualties in all border conflicts since 1979 combined. The destruction of 67 ships, including the core of China's amphibious assault capability, meant rebuilding would take years, and the strategic humiliation of having an invasion fleet destroyed before reaching its target was incalculable. Within hours of the disaster, Chinese social media erupted with questions about military competence despite government censorship efforts. Beijing's official response evolved over days. Initial statements claimed the ships had been on routine exercises and American aggression had caused unnecessary casualties, but satellite imagery and international media reports made the truth undeniable. China had attempted to invade Taiwan and been defeated decisively. By August 10th, Chinese government statements shifted to condemning American interference in internal affairs while implicitly acknowledging the operation had failed. Military leaders who had planned the invasion faced arrest and prosecution. For the 32 F-35C pilots who had executed the strike, August 8th became the most significant combat action in carrier aviation since World War II. They had prevented an invasion, saved countless lives on Taiwan, and demonstrated that carrier air power remained decisive in modern warfare. Commander Martinez received the Navy Cross for exceptional leadership, her pilots received Distinguished Flying Crosses, and the entire Air Wing received presidential recognition for preventing what could have been the Pacific War's first major battle. But the victory came with moral complexity that troubled many participants. The pilots had killed thousands of people, many of them conscripted soldiers who had no choice but to board the ships. Attacking civilian vessels, even those used for military purposes, felt different from engaging warships. And the images of thousands of troops drowning in the Taiwan Strait haunted those who saw them. War, even justified war, creates casualties that extend beyond strategic calculations. Commander Martinez, in a private conversation months later, said simply, "We did what was necessary, but necessary doesn't mean easy to live with." Strategically, the engagement reshaped the Pacific balance of power. China's attempt to seize Taiwan by force had failed catastrophically. American carrier strike groups had proven they could defend Taiwan against conventional invasion, and the cost of attempting future invasions, measured in thousands of lives and dozens of ships, appeared prohibitive. The Taiwan Strait, which days earlier had seemed vulnerable to Chinese military action, was now recognized as a killing zone where American air power held overwhelming advantage. The families of the 6,000 Chinese troops lost received official notifications of death in service, but little additional information. Chinese authorities, embarrassed by the disaster, suppressed details and discouraged public mourning. Gold Star families, grieving privately, had no public forum to express their loss. The soldiers and sailors who died, many of them young men fulfilling mandatory military service, were buried in unmarked graves, their sacrifice intended to expand Chinese territorial control, instead demonstrated the limits of military power against opponents with technological superiority. As the sun set on August 8th, debris from 67 ships floated across the Taiwan Strait. Oil slicks stretched for miles. Bodies and wreckage marked where an invasion fleet had been destroyed. Chinese rescue vessels continued pulling survivors from the water, but thousands would never be found. The strait that separates Taiwan from mainland China, contested for 70 years, remained a barrier that military force couldn't cross, and the message was unmistakable. Taiwan would not fall while American carriers defended it. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, does the prevention of invasion justify the massive loss of life, or could less lethal methods have been employed? Second, what does this engagement reveal about the viability of amphibious invasions in the age of precision anti-ship weapons? Third, should international law be clarified regarding attacks on civilian vessels used for military purposes? Comment your detailed strategic and ethical analysis below. Your insights drive the conversations we have on Navy Mission, and if this breakdown of the largest anti-ship engagement since World War II gave you new understanding of carrier strike capabilities, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Mission, and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and remember that the most important battles are those that prevent worse wars from occurring.